in the town of Redemption Gap was thin and cold, carrying the sharp scent of pine and dread. At the center of the muddy square stood the oak, its lowest branch adapted clumsily for a grim purpose. Beneath it, Elara Caine stood shivering, the rope loosely looped about her neck. Her pale blue dress, once a hopeful traveling garment, was now muddied and torn, barely concealing the pronounced swell of her stomach. She was perhaps 8 months along. The crowd gathered, tight and silent, consisted mostly of men whose faces were hardened by the frontier sun and self-righteous judgment. Elara had been accused of theft, a missing sack of flour and a half-smoked ham from the general store. But the true crime, whispered from beneath bonnets, was her existence. She was a woman alone, without a husband, and soon to birth a child of unknown provenance. In Redemption Gap, such an omission was a stain on their carefully constructed morality. Sheriff Jedediah Stone, a man whose principles were as rigid as his spine, read the charge from a sweat-stained piece of parchment. Elara Caine, by the law and will of the people of Redemption Gap, you are found guilty of larceny and vagrancy. The sentence is death by hanging. Elara lifted her gaze, tears frozen on her cheeks, and looked past the sheriff, past the jeering faces, towards the vast, unbroken line of the western horizon. She was not afraid of death, she was afraid of the child dying with her, never having drawn a single breath of free air. The executioner, a man named Silas who usually fixed wagons, adjusted the knot. The crowd leaned in, ready for the sharp release of tension. It was then that the silence broke. A sound, not of the town, but of the plains. A disciplined, powerful canter of a horse. A massive, jet-black Mustang burst into the square. Astride it sat a man unlike any in the gathered crowd. He was Wichapi, a respected war leader of the nearby Comanche band, though the white settlers simply called him the Silent Warrior. His deerskin tunic was fringed with meticulously crafted beads, his hair braided and adorned with feathers, and his posture radiated a quiet, unshakable authority. His dark eyes fixed immediately on Elara and the noose. Wichapi halted his Mustang directly before the gallows. The townsfolk, instantly terrified, scattered back, their attention ripped from the spectacle of execution to the looming threat of the outsider. Sheriff Stone, startled but gripping his rifle, was the only one who held his ground. "You are trespassing, warrior," Stone warned, his voice shaking despite his effort to sound steady. "Leave this place." Wichapi did not acknowledge the threat. He merely slid off his mount with a fluid grace. From a pouch tied to his belt, he pulled out a heavy leather bag that clinked with a distinct metallic sound. He walked to the center of the square, past the sheriff, and stopped right in front of the doomed woman. Wichapi looked into Elara's eyes, not with pity, but with a gaze that recognized a profound injustice. He saw the resilience flickering beneath the fear. He spoke, not in the rhythmic staccato of the Comanche tongue, but in rough, surprisingly clear English, learned from traders and captives. He dropped the heavy leather bag at Elara's feet. It hit the dry, hard earth with a dull thud, and a scattering of pure, hammered gold coins spilled out, glittering against the gray soil. The sudden silence that followed was heavier than the sheriff's law. Every eye in the square was fixed on the unbelievable cascade of wealth. "Take this gold and release her," Wichapi said, his voice low and guttural, carrying the weight of command. "She is worth more than your flour and your ham, more than all your pitiful land." Sheriff Stone, momentarily stunned by the sight of the gold, enough to pay Redemption Gap's taxes for a decade, recovered his composure. He was a man who lived by the letter of his own law, not by the mercy of commerce or a warrior's intervention. "The charge is not just theft, warrior," Stone said, gesturing vaguely at Elara's belly. "The charge is sin and defiance against the order of our God. Your gold cannot pay for that." Wichapi turned slowly to face the sheriff, his expression unreadable. "Your God allows a woman and child to die for a stolen meal? My people call that starvation. My God calls that murder." A murmur ran through the crowd. Many men, seeing the size of the gold and the cold certainty of the Comanche, shifted uneasily. The promise of wealth warred directly with their instilled fear and prejudice. "This is our law, savage," Sheriff Stone spat, taking a provocative step closer. "You may be a chief among your own kind, but here, you have no authority. The sentence stands." Wichapi nodded, a movement so slight it was barely perceptible. He accepted the refusal, but acceptance did not mean defeat. He knew the white man's ways. If gold wouldn't work, perhaps the threat of loss would. He took a deep, calculating breath, his dark eyes sweeping over the sheriff and the few men who stood behind him. "She will not hang today," Wichapi stated, not as a request, but as a prophecy. "If the rope tightens on her neck, I will take the life of every man who touched that rope. I will burn every building where you kept your women and children safe. You can have your single execution, but you will pay the blood price of your entire town for the morning's foolishness." The air went dead silent again. This was a direct, credible threat from a warrior known for his uncompromising word. The sheriff felt the weight of the town's survival settle heavily on his shoulders. He looked at the rope, then at the gold, and finally at the unwavering intensity of the Comanche's gaze. The cold fear that Wichapi's threat ignited spread through the crowd like wildfire, extinguishing the last embers of righteous anger. Every man knew the warrior's reputation was not based on idle boasting. Comanche reprisals were swift, brutal, and indiscriminate. The townsmen who had been loudest in their condemnation of Elara were now the first to look away, unwilling to risk their families for the sake of one woman and Sheriff Stone's pride. Sheriff Stone was caught. If he proceeded with the execution, he signed the death warrant for his town. If he simply released Elara and took the gold, he lost all authority and appeared weak before his own people and the encroaching native threat. He had to save face. He had to maintain the illusion that the law of redemption gap held sway. "I cannot, by law, accept a bribe for a crime already judged," Stone grated out, his hand tightening so hard on his rifle that his knuckles went white. She must face the consequences of her actions. Wichapi saw the flicker of desperation in the sheriff's eyes, not for justice, but for control. The warrior's mind worked with swift, surgical efficiency. He did not care for the white man's law, only the woman's life. "No bribe," Wichapi corrected, stepping deliberately toward the oak tree. He reached up and, with a single, powerful flick of his wrist, sliced the hanging rope from the branch using the razor edge of his knife. The thick rope dropped into the mud. The sheriff gasped, but dared not raise his rifle. Wichapi had not harmed the woman, only the instrument of the law. He returned to Stone, holding the severed rope in one hand and the bag of gold in the other. "The payment is not for the crime," Wichapi stated, his voice gaining resonance. "The payment is for the banishment. You have found her guilty. Banish her from your land. This gold pays for the price of her exile, far enough that she may never violate your foolish laws again." He held the gold out. "You uphold your law, and your town keeps its skin." The argument was flawless. Stone could tell the townsfolk that he had upheld the sentence of banishment and exacted a huge toll, the gold, for the trouble. He could save his pride and his town in the same breath. Yet, a final, spiteful impulse drove him to resist. "And what claim do you have over her, savage? Why does a Comanche warrior pay the exile price for a white strumpet?" Wichapi finally looked back at Elara, whose face was etched with exhaustion and disbelief. He had not intended this part, but Stone had forced his hand. His gaze was deep and solemn as he addressed the sheriff, but his words were meant for the woman. "She carries a spirit the wind has chosen to protect," Wichapi stated, invoking a concept Stone could never truly grasp. "A powerful spirit. It is my duty to ensure that spirit is born free. She is banished from your town, but she is not banished from the world. I am her passage." Wichapi threw the bag of gold into the sheriff's arms. The unexpected weight forced Stone to stagger back a step. The matter was closed. The sheriff looked from the gold to the expectant faces of his terrified townsfolk. He lowered his rifle. "Banishment," Stone conceded through gritted teeth. "By the law of redemption gap, Elara Caine is banished. She is never to step foot on this soil again. Go, now. If she returns, your blood and the blood of every Comanche near us will pay the price." Wichapi did not wait. He nodded once, a gesture of finality, and then placed his large, warm hand on Elara's shoulder, turning her away from the instruments of her death. The first part of the bargain was complete. She was alive. Wichapi did not walk, he strode. His pace was measured and urgent, pulling Elara along as if she weighed no more than a bundle of blankets. He led her directly toward the magnificent black Mustang, still waiting patiently where its master had dismounted. Elara, numb from shock and the sudden surge of adrenaline, barely registered the sheriff shouting threats of eternal banishment behind them. Her sole focus was the firm grip of the Comanche's hand on her arm. a hand that promised life instead of death. As they reached the horse, Wichapi spoke a few quick words in his own language, a smooth, flowing series of sounds that meant nothing to Elara. He lifted her easily, despite her weight and the impediment of her pregnancy, setting her gently onto the saddle. He then mounted behind her, his powerful frame shielding her from the receding sight of Redemption Gap. The Mustang surged forward, leaving the town, the gold, and the judgment behind in a wake of kicked-up dust. The journey was a tense silence broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the Mustang's hooves and Elara's ragged breathing. They rode west, away from the settled lands and toward the towering, snow-dusted mountains. Elara's body protested every jarring movement. Her back ached, her belly felt heavy and tight, and the saddle was a relentless torment. Wichapi never spoke unless necessary. When they stopped briefly to water the horse at a stream, he simply pointed to a cluster of juniper bushes, indicating where she could relieve herself. He handed her a piece of dried meat and a cup of cold water, his expression remote. He watched the horizon constantly, his eyes missing nothing. "Thank you," Elara whispered, the words sounding inadequate and lost in the vastness of the plains. Wichapi turned his head slightly. "The wind carries no thanks, white woman," he replied, his English clipped and pragmatic. "We ride." She realized then the chasm between them was wider than the prairie they crossed. They had no shared past, no shared language beyond basic commands, and certainly no shared understanding of the bargain struck. She was simply a vessel carrying the spirit he was determined to save, a duty he had paid heavily for. As evening approached, the cold intensified. Elara began to shiver violently. Wichapi noticed immediately. He didn't ask, he simply stopped the horse in a sheltered rock alcove. He dismounted, and before Elara could protest, he was stripping a thick, warm bison hide from the Mustang's saddle and wrapping it tightly around her shoulders. The heat of the fur was immediate, a tangible act of protection that contradicted his silent, aloof demeanor. Later, huddled beneath the hide near a small, smokeless fire he had expertly built, Elara tried again. Where are we going?" Wichapi was sharpening his knife on a whetstone. He paused, his dark eyes meeting hers across the small flicker of the fire. "To the place where the wind stops to rest," he said, cryptically. He pointed towards the dark, looming outline of the mountains. "To my people. They know the secrets of the spirit you carry. And they know how to make a cradle from the willow tree." It was the most he had spoken. The words were strange, beautiful, and utterly terrifying. She was exchanging one form of exile and judgment for another, trading the sheriff's noose for the unknown fate awaiting her in a Comanche camp. But as the child within her kicked sharply, a sign of life and protest, Elara clung to the fur, trusting the silent warrior who had paid gold and promised war for her right to breathe. She closed her eyes, praying their journey would not end before their sanctuary was found. The journey ended 2 days later, not at a bustling Comanche camp, but in a hidden, sheltered valley high in the foothills. A place of quiet strength and abundant spring water, used for birthing and healing. Wichapi led them to a small cluster of teepees made of clean, tightly stretched hide. The moment they arrived, Elara felt the invisible wall of tension between her and the warrior dissipate, replaced by a sense of watchful welcome. 2 women emerged from the largest teepee. One was old, her face a map of deep, compassionate wrinkles. The other was young, perhaps Elara's age, with eyes that held both caution and curiosity. They wore soft, intricately embroidered garments and moved with a serene efficiency. Wichapi simply nodded to the elder, Numi, or Earth Mother, and gestured toward Elara. "She carries the protected spirit," he stated to the women, then spoke to Elara for the last time that day. "You are safe. Rest now." With that, the silent warrior turned and vanished, leaving her entirely to the care of his people. The contrast with Redemption Gap was staggering. There was no judgment in the Comanche women's eyes, only practical assessment. Numi led Elara into the warm, smoky shelter of the teepee. The earth floor was covered with thick furs, and the air was filled with the calming scent of dried sage. They immediately removed Elara's soiled white dress, replacing it with a loose, soft leather garment. They offered her a broth of deer bone and herbs, and gently massaged the painful, swollen joints in her ankles and back. Elara communicated mostly through gestures and exhausted sighs, but the care was universal. Numi understood every pained look, every sharp intake of breath. The Comanche women treated her not as an outcast or a sinner, but as a crucial participant in a sacred, difficult process. The respite, however, was brief. Just after sunset, Elara felt the first true, tearing contraction. The pain was immediate and consuming. Numi and the younger woman, Paha, Antelope, moved into a practiced rhythm. They spoke in soothing Comanche, irrelevant to Elara's understanding but vital to her morale. They gave her herbs to chew and encouraged her to walk the perimeter of the shelter when the contractions were light, and to bear down with primal strength when they peaked. Hours later, the storm intensified. Elara, screaming now, was convinced she would not survive. The child was coming, but slowly, stubbornly. Numi knelt beside her, her voice a steady drumbeat, reminding Elara of her strength. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the teepee entrance. It was Wichapi, though he stood outside the birthing space. He didn't enter, but his presence was a shield. Then, Numi saw the complication. The baby was not positioning correctly. With a swift, practiced movement and a focused prayer spoken into the air, the elder woman applied firm, agonizing pressure to Elara's belly, shifting the child. Elara cried out one final, desperate scream that seemed to shake the very canvas of the teepee. Then, a sudden, wet rush, and a sound that eclipsed every sound before it. The loud, indignant cry of a healthy newborn. Numi smiled, a vast, luminous expression. Paha swiftly cleaned the infant and placed the tiny, slick body onto Elara's exhausted chest. It was a girl. Elara looked at the child, her own fear and pain instantly forgotten, replaced by a fierce, maternal love. The protected spirit had arrived. Sunlight filtered through the smoke hole of the teepee the next morning, illuminating the tiny, peaceful face of Elara's daughter. They had named her Atika, a Comanche word meaning wind, in honor of the unseen force that had carried them to safety. Elara, though weak, was buoyant, gazing at Atika nestled against her breast. Wichapi finally entered the teepee, moving quietly and respectfully. He paused beside the sleeping mother and child, his imposing presence softened by the intimate scene. "She is strong," he observed simply. "She is a miracle," Elara whispered back, shifting Atika so the warrior could see her face. "Why did you do it, Wichapi? Why did you risk so much for a stranger?" Wichapi settled on a bison hide near the fire pit. "I saw a sign, days ago," he explained, his voice deeper than usual. A hawk was caught in the wire fence the white men built, and the hawk carried a child's feather in its talons. "That is a bad omen." It meant a spirit, a pure spirit, was unjustly trapped and doomed by the white world's rigid lines. "I knew I had to break the trap before the spirit was crushed." He looked at Atika. "You were the trap, and she is the spirit." Their peace, however, was violently interrupted. A gunshot cracked through the valley, shattering the silence. Wichapi sprang to his feet, drawing his knife. Numi rushed Atika into Elara's arms, whispering fiercely in Comanche. Before Wichapi could reach the entrance, Sheriff Stone and 4 of his deputies stumbled into the clearing, their faces grim and vindictive. Stone's uniform was dirty, his eyes narrowed with desperate rage. The gold was fake, savage. Stone roared, clutching a blackened, melted coin. "Lead with copper underneath. You stole from Redemption Gap and threatened our lives. The exile is void. Now I take the woman, the child, and your head." Wichapi stood motionless, his shadow falling across the teepee door. "The gold was not fake, Sheriff. It was fool's gold. But I paid the price, you understand, wealth and fear. The real price was paid in blood." He gestured with his knife towards the ground just outside the ring of teepees. There, freshly dug, were 4 small, identical mounds of earth. Stone and his deputies stared in confusion. "When you drove us out," Wichapi continued, his voice heavy with finality, "your laws dictated that Elara and her child die. They demanded a blood price. I did not trade my gold for her life, Sheriff. I traded her life for the lives of your children." He revealed that during the night, knowing Stone would eventually track him, he had dug graves for the sheriff's 4 children, leaving tokens of their execution: a tiny doll, a miniature wooden horse, a child's shoe, near the graves to indicate their supposed demise in a Comanche reprisal. "I showed you the consequence of the execution. I held the lives of your children in the balance and won your fear," Wichapi concluded. "The gold paid for the burial, nothing more. You chose the safety of your blood over your law." Stone stood paralyzed, the rage draining out, replaced by a devastating, horrifying realization of the choice he had made and the terror he had endured. He looked at the graves, then at the rifle in his hand. He lowered the weapon slowly. "Go back to your town, Sheriff," Wichapi commanded, "and tell your people the price of vengeance is too high. The spirit is free. The debt is paid." Stone, a broken man, turned without a word and stumbled away. The deputies followed, leaving the valley in silence. Wichapi returned to Elara, who was weeping silently, holding her daughter tighter than ever. He knelt beside her, his fierce gaze gentle. "You are free, Elara Caine. The wind now holds your tail."